Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well today, Rory. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and this is episode 133. We're going to be discussing 3 topics related to counselling study, counselling practice, and psychotherapy, starting off with the first question, which is, can you become a counsellor if you have a criminal conviction? Our check-in with CPCAB today, which is our second topic. Kelly Budd spoke to Rory about a brand new book that CPCAB have just brought out, and that's called A Student Guide to Therapeutic Counselling. Can you give us an idea of what we can expect from our check-in today, Rory?
Absolutely. Well, Kelly's going to outline their new book, and she's going to be talking in detail about a couple of the chapters of the book and how it will help students not only on CPCAB courses, but I think there's a generic element in there for students who are doing any course. I've been lucky enough to get a forward copy of the book, and I've read through it, and it's absolutely fab. So, worth listening to and worth checking out.
Exactly what we would expect from CPCAB. And moving on to our last topic for episode 133, we're going to be discussing a topic that I guess it's not nice to look at it. It's called a living will or a professional will, and it is what do you put in place as a counsellor, as a psychotherapist, for your clients in case something happens to you and you're not around anymore, if you're in an accident or if you become critically ill or you pass away. What happens with your caseload? So we're going to be talking about that as well. But let's start off, I guess, on a lighter topic, if you can call it that, Rory, because we're talking about criminal records. Can you become a counsellor if you have a criminal conviction?
Well, the answer to that question is yes. Through my career as a tutor, I've had the absolute privilege to teach some right, as we say in the north of England, some right rum custards. People who've a rum custard, it doesn't travel very well outside Manchester, England. That is someone who's had maybe a bit of a checkered past. And yes, in certainly in the UK, we have we have a judicial system which is all about helping people get back their lives and move their lives on. They paid the price of society, and what they're going to do is try and move their lives on. And I've worked with a lot of people who've had some quite serious convictions, and they have gone on to be counsellors, gone on to help people working. I can think of one person who worked in drugs and rehabilitation, helping people get back on track, and I was Simon the only the other week, who does a fantastic job. But there are some things to consider. There are some convictions where it would be impossible for someone to be a counsellor, and that one of those convictions is what we used to call Schedule 1. Anything to do with sexual offending, you wouldn't be able to join an ethical body, and to be honest with you, neither would any organisation take you on as a counsellor. One of the things to consider here is that for those who go on to practice, you need in the UK a disclosing and barring check. The disclosing and barring service, which is a service which seeks out your criminal background if you have one, and shows it to the employer, and the employer can make a judgment. If you have a Schedule 1 offence of maybe something where it's a very, very violent crime, that may debar you. But there are some steps you can take. So if you're listening to this and maybe you have a criminal record, the first thing I would say to you is you need to approach your tutor at the training institute initially before you do anything, and explain what the offence is, and talk about it and speak to your tutor. Also, if you're at a college or a university in the UK, and I suspect this will be the same, probably across Europe and other countries, there's usually a health and safety officer, and you speak to the health and safety officer of the college or the university, and they're really good at understanding what offences may be deemed a risk. So there's a real conversation between the tutor and the health and safety officer. It's conversations I've had as a tutor. But yes, the answer to that question is that people who have a criminal past and who have getting their lives back on track can indeed train as counsellors.
Yeah. And as you quite rightly said, Rory, it does depend. And the process, I can speak about the BACP here in the UK, and their process is that you would go onto your course, you would do your studies, and when you came to that part, which is usually year 2, level 4 on a diploma in the UK, where you would now be going into practice and you would need to join a professional organisation. You would need to submit your details to the BACP. And if you did have a criminal conviction, you would need to submit a motivation. And that motivation, really, they would be asking you to explain where you were at the time of the conviction. I don't mean where you lived. I kind of mean where you were personally, what was going on for you, what were the nature of the crime was that resulted in the criminal conviction. And then they're most interested in what your path has been since there, how you've changed. So it's a very reflective piece that you would write in addition to your application for membership. And then there is a meeting of a board, and I think that I'm not 100% sure how often they meet, but I think it's once a month. I could be mistaken on that. But the board will meet and they consider the applications and they look over them and they read through them and they make a decision on that. So I guess just speaking for the BACP, if you were to phone them up and say, hey, I have a criminal conviction, can I become a counsellor? They may be pretty vague in their answer in saying, well, I can't really give you an answer on that. You'd need to submit that documentation for the board to have a look at. But again, as Rory said, the whole purpose of counselling is to be there potentially for people when they're at their darkest hour of need. And it's about the road that we've walked, and we haven't all walked the same road. And sometimes walking a difficult road where you find yourself maybe in situations that you didn't fully intend to get in, you just kind of get into them, and getting out of that and changing your life is a catalyst for wanting to go into counselling, wanting to study, wanting to help other people, because you feel the transformation in your own life. And I guess if we speak about counselling in general, we're speaking about non-judgmental view of people, and this should be held by the ethical bodies. So yeah, it's definitely a consideration if you have a criminal record. But as Rory said, there are certain offences that would preclude you, and it's really worth doing your research just before embarking on your study.
Yes, and I guess there's some practicalities. You mentioned quite rightly the BACP, Ken. I think UKCP or the Counselling Society or any ethical body would probably have the same type of procedures in place for someone who wanted to join them and go on to practice, who had a criminal record. I think there's some other things to consider. Clients do Google their therapists, and I can remember having someone contact me from prison who wanted to be a counsellor. And a quick Google of their name would have shown that they were part of a very, very high-profile crime. And what we do know is that employers look at people's social media and they Google their names. That is pretty much a standard HR set of skills now to try and find out who they're employing. And that would have been very, very difficult to take someone on whose name had been plastered all over the media, and it was a very distinct name. I'll say no more than that. The other thing is that although you may get onto the course, it may be that certain organisations wouldn't take you on. So I was a support worker who worked in mental health for a time as an outreach worker, and they wouldn't take anybody on who had a conviction for assault. No matter how minor it was, they just wouldn't take them on. And there was no ifs and no buts about that. And if that's their policies, because there's under the Equalities Act in the UK, having a criminal conviction isn't seen as a distinct characteristic. So I think you have to be, you have to be realistic. But as a general kind of observation, having a criminal record should not debar you, with the exception we talked about, from becoming someone who goes on to help. And as Ken says, to give back to society, that's the whole point of having a restorative justice system, in my view.
Oh yeah, very much so. There is one little area as we come to the end of this topic that I want to cover. And that is the form that is filled in when you join a professional body. And as you say, Rory, most professional bodies are going to have a little box there that says, do you have any previous criminal convictions? And there's a little yes, no box there. And if it's a yes, it's going to say, tell us more. And the advice here is, if you have something, no matter how minor it is, do not try and hide it. Click on the yes and write it up. Because as we've discussed, that you've heard what the process is, but if you say no and you tell a fib on that form, hoping that it won't be found out, and it is found out at a later date and reported to the professional body, or the professional body finds out, that's a whole different case. That becomes a disciplinary case, and that could land you in a whole heap of trouble. So be open and be forthcoming with that, is all I can suggest.
Yes, and good luck to you. And I don't think you can underestimate the value that people with different paths have in terms of the training group, because, you know, a lot of people will have a distinct view on someone who may have gone to prison. But actually, if you've got someone in the group who has, you can get a really understanding of why they got there, which really does foster how to be non-judgmental and to consider it's, you know, people's lives are not always kind of binary. You know, people, you know, lead different sorts of lives. And I think that's really, really interesting. And it certainly, as a tutor, when I work with people who've had criminal convictions, made me think my perspective on things, quite frankly.
Yeah. Wow, what a topic. So now our next topic is our check-in with CPCAB. And Rory, you spoke with Kelly Budd. And this is the topic that you spoke about. I know we'll have many of our listeners drooling. And that is A Student's Guide to Therapeutic Counselling. It's a brand new book. And we know we love our books. And how do we know this? Because if we go to our Facebook group page, where we have thousands, tens of thousands of students, qualified counsellors, tutors, supervisors, the topic of books comes up again and again. What books should I be reading? What books are you reading at the moment? So it's a very hot topic. And if you're not part of that discussion, you want to get in there, because our topics for the Counselling Tutor Podcast are very often taken from our Facebook group, as well as the topics that are discussed in Check-In with CPCAB. Go to Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, come and join the discussion. And what did we learn from Kelly Budd about the brand new book, Rory?
Well, I mean, what we did learn is this is one of a number of books that's been written by the CPCAB team to cover the courses, and this is the first one that specifically covers level 4, the level 4 course, and it's really in depth. I was fortunate enough, and people are going to be going, "Oh, it's great being you, Rory, getting free copies of books." I got a free forward copy of it before it went to publication, and it's really, really in depth. It really does cover a lot of the criteria that CPCAB asks students to cover. And also, there's a lot in there for non-CPCAB students. It talks about things like patterns of relating, building a therapeutic relationship. There's discussions around how to use skills. There's just, I could go on and on and on. And there's also information that I think would link strongly to anybody who's doing maybe a level 5 course that is to do with professional practice. So I think there's something in there for qualified practitioners as well. But it really is an in-depth book. And Kelly, as you hear, I'll speak to Kelly, and she will cover a couple of topics that the book has that we found interesting.
So let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
And here we are with Kelly Budd. And Kelly's got some exciting news for us, haven't you, Kelly?
I certainly have, Rory. It's something I'm really, really happy to be here today to promote, which is that CPCAB are proud to announce that we're publishing a new book. Some of the students out there will be aware of the Counselling Skills and Studies book that came out several years ago to support the level 2 and 3 qual. And we've spent the last couple of years writing one to particularly support diploma students, looking at around about kind of level 4, level 5 with a placement. So there's a very new book coming out on the 30th of November to support those students.
Fab. And I've been fortunate enough to get a forward copy of it, and I've had a little look through it, And it's very, very comprehensive. And I think what I like about the book, Kelly, is it seems to be written from a student perspective. It
Yeah,
seems to be very
yeah.
student-centered. Do you want to tell me a little bit about the thought process that went into writing it to make it from a student's perspective?
Well, our aim is to try and make it really usable for people studying counselling qualifications. We've called it a student's guide to therapeutic counselling because it really is aimed at the kind of thought processes that will go on for a student when they're beginning and processing through their kind of level 4 diploma. So it's the style of writing is a kind of Q&A, so as if the tutor and the student are talking through the concepts of counselling and the process of studying. So it's very much, if a student reads it, we hope it kind of sounds like them and the things that they would want to ask.
Yes, I mean, that is the real strong sense I get. And as I say, it's very, very, very comprehensive. The things that are covered, some of the things that, I think sometimes one may not consider, and that is things about, there's a little exercise in there about how you present yourself in the therapy room. How do you dress? What does it say about you? And it's that kind of self-awareness that's really, really useful, so that people are able to kind of think, well, if I turn up wearing cologne or perfume, what is the impact that might have on the client?
Yeah, it should help students work through the real practical issues that they're going to come across, but also embed it in previous practitioner examples and the kind of theory of practice as well. So it's very much, what are you going to come up against? What might be the things you want to consider, and to be really thought-provoking. It's got lots of activities and exercises in it to allow the student to really explore for themselves what that means to them.
Yes, and the book is broken down into 3 parts. And then there's the references. So part 1 is training to be a counsellor, part 2 is practice issues, and third is professional issues. What motivated you to break it into those 3 specific sections?
I think when going through diploma training, the training to be a counsellor part really is focused on the kind of core aspects of being a counsellor at that level. So we map it against our 7 processes, but it essentially looks at everything that you need to consider to be a safe and competent practitioner at diploma. The practice issues are essentially everything that comes with that. So getting a placement, finding the right supervisor, going for personal therapy, self-care, and looking at avoidance of burnout. So kind of really, what is that student going to be going through whilst they're studying? And then the professional issues are a lot of the kind of unusual things that come up, the kind of what ifs, so different dilemmas and difficulties they might encounter, but also things like, okay, so what are you looking for from a professional membership body? What are you going to do with your qualification when you get to the end of it? So what does it mean to be a professional at the end of the qualification? So it really does map their journey.
Yes, and you mentioned, and I think that's really important, because when I read it, it did read very much like a roadmap where you start right at the beginning, which is about the very basics, is working ethically and safely as a counselling professional, and it's kind of lesson 1, day 1, isn't it? In diploma.
Yeah, and it really is informed by. It's written by 4 previous counselling tutors who work for CPCAB. So it's essentially a response to all the questions and queries that we've come across in our years of tutoring and in our time at CPCAB, understanding what students might want to know more about in order to succeed and flourish.
Yes, and I think what's really interesting is that it's mapped around what is called the 7 processes, and that's a CPCAB specific idea, although it is transportable to other awarding bodies and to other courses. But it's working ethically and safely, working within the relationship, working within difference and diversity, working with focus on the helping client, working with self-awareness, working with a coherent framework of skills, theory and techniques, and work self-reflectively. So it really maps that journey, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it pulls out different themes that they'll be learning about, and then gives them some more references, some more kind of theoretical underpinning, so that they've got something to draw upon when they're in their classroom with their peers as well. So it's hopefully going to add to the journey for them.
Yes, and it's just such a useful thing, because it's becoming more apparent that counselling is becoming more of an accountable profession than ever before, and that's accountability starts in the training process. Not something that is acquired after that. People should be ready to work. I think a lot of education now is focused on work readiness, getting people ready to go into a placement, and you do indeed discuss placements and what to look for in placements.
Yeah, it really does kind of break down the steps that a student could take when they're looking for an appropriate placement. What do they need from it? What the agency might require of them? Even going into what sort of supervisor might you want to be working with in order to support your practice. So it really does kind of look at all the practical issues as well. And we hope it's quite light-hearted in a way as well. There's a lot of, particularly in the chapters I wrote, there's quite a lot of humour in there because I think to some degree, there's a lot of light moments in the training as well. So I've had students that approach placements that are completely wrong for them, and they come back and they're really able to see that and able to kind of think, oh, actually, if I was working there, this might happen, this might happen. So it really pulls on some of the case examples. If any of my old students read it, they probably recognise themselves in there on occasion as well.
well, let's hope they don't. Let's hope they don't want a fee.
No royalties.
No royalties, please. So, and I think one of the chapters that I like the most is the working with self-awareness, because I think that really encompasses everything that we do as practitioners, working with a very self-aware perspective. And there's a super chapter on this. And one exercise, and I'm going to give this away, is think about what you see as your own resources. And really asking people to think, what are the resources that you have as a practitioner, and what happens if they become depleted?
Yeah, I think particularly the self-awareness chapter has got a lot of interesting exercises, ones that people can do on their own in their kind of reflective time, even ones they can do with peers or in their kind of group environment. So it's a real kind of handbook, but it helps you kind of tap into really what do you believe, what are you kind of considering in terms of your progression. So yeah, it's very, very useful, I hope.
Indeed. And one of the things that really struck me was that if I, as a former tutor myself, I think there's lots of scope here for getting this book and having ready-made lessons. It could be that you could literally just read part of the chapter, use the summary at the end, and say, "There's the exercise, there's the lesson plan." So this is going to be a big boon, isn't it? I think for tutors as well.
Yeah, if I was still a tutor, I would be ripping off the exercises in this book and using them in my classroom. Because there are some that are kind of purpose made to be used with groups to particularly hit certain criteria. So for CPCAB students, it's an absolute dream because it will kind of map directly onto the criteria that they're trying to meet, and their tutors will be able to make sense of it as well. They'll see it and they'll recognise how that links to what they're trying to deliver.
Yeah, so it's a must-have book for tutors, really, isn't it? It's one that's on the desk, as we like to say in tutor world. And on the desk means that it's a copy that we have for ourselves, not for the students' desk copies, they're called. And finally, I think there's something for the qualified practitioner here as well. Coming towards the end, there's a section on living wills, something I think that probably a professional practitioner would be considering, someone who's working in maybe private practice.
Yep, there are things in there on looking at how you would get your own insurance, your living will, kind of confidentiality and case notes. So the kind of real things that you would need to consider when you qualify and you're starting to move into practice. And it might be that your agency has got all of that set up for you, or a lot of those aspects set up for you, but you might be looking at progressing into private practice, and you really do need to start thinking about the additional professional kind of requirements that come with that.
Absolutely. I'm going to spend a lot of time reading this book because I've got a free copy, and I'm sure there'll be people, free copy. It's right for you, Rory, isn't it? And the answer to that is yes, it is. So the book's called A Student's Guide to Therapeutic Counselling. It's written by Kelly Budd, Sandra McKeever, Tracy Postings and Heather Price, who I know is a colleague of yours.
Yes,
It's published by Sage, and we will, and as I say, we will put some links into our page so that people can view it and make a decision. So, Kelly Budd, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Rory. Thanks very much.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
That was enlightening, and as Kelly mentioned, I mentioned, the links are in the show notes. And where do you find the show notes? Well, that's really straightforward. If you go to counsellingtutor.com and go to the podcast tab, you'll find the show notes and the links to the publisher and where you can buy and inspect the book on podcast 133. So click those links, have a look, and you too can see an outline of the book.
Thank you very much for that, Rory, and Kelly, of course. So moving on to our final topic for episode 133, living will or a professional will. Tell us more.
Well, yes, it's really, really interesting. A few months ago, a colleague of mine told me that one of his colleagues had suddenly died, and she'd left a professional will. And a professional will gave clear instructions on how to handle clients' data, how to contact the clients, how to wind up her practice should the unthinkable happen, which it did. And we're living in a more ethical environment now, and certainly for qualified colleagues, having a professional will really, really is a must have. And there's some real implications to not having a professional will. The first one is that you don't want your loved ones speaking to clients. Could you imagine the client phoning up and saying, my therapist hasn't turned up, and a bereaved relative saying, well, look, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, your therapist has died or is incapacitated. Loved ones need to be getting on with the business of grieving, not taking care of clients with the best will in the world. And how's that going to sound to the client? So professional will would ask someone, a colleague, maybe a supervisor, to take care of the kind of procedural stuff if you weren't around, contacting clients, making sure that if there's any safeguarding issues, that those would be that'd be taken care of, maybe referring clients to another therapist, winding the practice up, maybe paying a few bills, if people hire rooms and that type of thing. And as I say, there's a strong ethical implication. And I have made what I would call a really important handout. Doesn't matter if you're a professional therapist, someone who is qualified, or someone who's a student, go to the podcast tab 133 and download this handout. And I've made a professional will grid. It's not a legal document. I've got to say that. It's not a legal document, but it's going to be very helpful. It's a template. It's going to be very helpful in you kind of thinking about what you need to put in. And I go through step-by-step procedures of who you need to contact and how to set it up. So it's an essential download, really.
Yeah, definitely. You can find that by going to Counselling Tutor, top of the page, podcast tab, episode 133, get Rory's download there. Lot to think about. And, when we kind of started this podcast, we said this is not a nice topic. It's never nice to think about you may die one day, but it is an inevitability, and it's going to happen to every single one of us. That's a certainty. But what happens if it is sudden and you're carrying that caseload? And this needs to be considered. When we contract with those clients, they come into us and they're bringing their life, they're bringing their story. Quite often, a relationship has built. A trusting relationship is built. Maybe notes have been taken that are stored somewhere. What happens to all of this information? How is it handled? Who does it go to? Who handles that for you? And as you quite rightly said, Rory, our loved ones, our family that may be working with our other will, they're not qualified to work with things like confidentiality. They haven't gone on a counselling course and studied what needs to be known about this. So it's about thinking about who you could trust with this? If this is not something you've done, who could you trust with this? Because it's big. It needs to be a colleague, and very often it can be a reciprocal deal kind of thing, where not always it can just be one way, where you would ask them if they would take care of it from you, but it may be a reciprocal where you say, I could look after yours, you could look after mine. That's something for you to talk about, but make sure they know about it so that they don't suddenly get this email out of the blue saying person has passed away and they have appointed you as. You'd want them to know about it beforehand. And as you quite rightly said, Rory, it's not just about your client load, it's not just about your case load, it's about the administrative and the financial parts of your practice as well. Direct debits, your insurance payments, your membership payments to a professional body. Who is going to contact those people and give the information, stop that, and kind of wind it up for you? As you said, Rory, is there any outstanding money on room rental or anything like that? And then the other thing to keep in mind with a living will or professional will is, how is the information given over? So, for instance, if you have a client load that this person needs to contact to let them know, or to make arrangements for them, or to do a referral, or to hold them over that period as they find someone else, how is that information given over? Because it's confidential until you pass away. Only after you pass away is it right that the person is able to look at that. So how is that given over? So you may consider placing it in a password protected document where the person that you've made the arrangement has the password for that, and they would only take that password and use it if you passed away and it was necessary.
Yes, and I think also that we do live in a kind of litigious society. It's very possible that if this isn't done correctly, that relatives may very well be able to bring a case against the estate under, say, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations, if the data isn't handled correctly. So it is something that we all have to consider. And I have a personal will. It's not something that you like to do because you're looking at your own mortality. I think people put making wills off for that reason. That's why a lot of people die without a will. And having had to tender an estate or to wind up an estate where someone hadn't had a will, I can tell you it was a complete nightmare, and it took forever because there was no clear direction from the person who isn't with us anymore of what to do and who to do it for. So I would say do that sooner or later. If you're a professional in practice, put it at the top of your agenda. Start making those plans. There's a super handout which tells you all the things you need to think about and the template. Download it and start putting that in place because, as Abraham Lincoln said, there are two things that are sure in life: taxes and death.
Yeah.
So there we have it.
there you go. I want to give a shout out as well for one of our partners here at Counselling Tutor, and it's a company called Private Practice Paperwork, and you'll hear more from them on our podcast in the future. But they are Private Practice Paperwork, all one word.co.uk. They are worth visiting as well because they have a lot of paperwork that kind of covers practice, and they do have a clinical will template that you can download for them, which kind of gives you some insights. Go and have a look at that if you don't have one in place, if you're wondering where do I start with a clinical will. So privatepracticepaperwork.co.uk, one of our partners. This has been episode 133 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We started off by asking, can you become a counsellor if you have a criminal conviction? Rory checked in with CPCAB and spoke with Kelly Budd today on a brand new book that they've just brought out called A Student's Guide to Therapeutic Counselling. And we ended speaking about a living will or professional will.
Yeah, and as always, definitely stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.